Hello everybody. As requested from Twitter, today I'm going to be quickly going through and essentially doing a video on analyzing songs, particularly one of the most requested ones being Reveries in the Crimson Beyond, which is Phrolova's ending song and the one that plays when you enter the Lost Beyond at the end of the story. So I'm going to be doing this a bit more impromptu, it's like unscripted this time around, so I hope you guys don't mind. But essentially, I don't think this is going to be too long of a video, so I'll just be quickly running through the lyrics, running through kind of like the symbolic aspects and explaining when it is necessary. So just a quick credit to the person who made the video with the lyrics and the song, do appreciate it very much. But without any further ado, it's going to be rather short, so let's get started. Always a classic, this song. So good.
Hi, it's been a while since the last time that I saw your smile.
So just a quick pause here. I think it's kind of like a bit important to just quickly talk about these first two lines because I think it's a bit open-ended in that we don't really know specifically who Phrolova is addressing in the song. I think there's like two of the most common interpretations are simply that one, Phrolova is talking to Rover, which would make a lot of sense, or Phrolova is talking to the villagers. It really is kind of dependent on your headcanon as to which of these two are going to be the subjects of the song, and I think they're both kind of like valid interpretations regardless. But if, for example, you think that Rover is the subject of that Phrolova is kind of addressing or talking about, then of course it kind of like shows that, you know, she has a lot of attachment to Rover and she wants to make Rover part of her Lost Beyond, which she does mention quite a bit in the story. If you were to interpret that these are the villagers that she's talking about, it also makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, Phrolova does really just want to see the villagers alive again, even if that is kind of like a false reality. Regardless of that, however, I think the most important thing to dissect from these two lines is that she has a very strong willingness to seek comfort in the past. When she says, it's been a while since I last saw your smile, it's kind of this idea that even though these experiences and what she's seeking is long gone, she still essentially yearns for that warmth. So yeah.
What a perfect fit. The last piece have fallen into place.
And I think like these two lines, so what a perfect fit, the last piece has fallen into place. I think if you've played through the story, if you're paying attention, it is kind of like a little bit obvious what she's talking about here. The last piece that she's talking about is essentially herself, right? When she dies to Rover's hands and she has to kind of create the Lost Beyond, which is incomplete without Leviathan's gem, the final piece that she has realized is essentially needed to make the Lost Beyond is herself, right? Because all the villages are there, all the reverberations of the villages are there. The only thing that's left really is just her kind of participation in her little project. However, we all know that essentially it is still incomplete, but it is still kind of like very touching and perfect in a way, because when Phrolova dies and she kind of grasps her violin, she kind of realizes that what was important all along was kind of the feeling and the sort of basically letting go, right? As opposed to her eternal crusade in achieving something which was effectively impossible. And that's something that's gonna come up a bit later in the sorry, not the poem, but it's kind of like a poem, the song as well. So we'll kind of talk about that a bit later.
I've been craving to touch you like moonlight stroking your face.
So this is actually a very deceptively important line. The whole thing of moonlight. If you've been watching my Yuno video, or even like reading my Twitter, you'll actually know that there's a lot of hidden symbolism with the moon, with Phrolova's symbolism and story, that really doesn't kind of like get talked about enough, really. So specifically speaking, what the moon and the moonlight in extension symbolizes for Phrolova is essentially impossibility, or something which is unachievable, right? And this, of course, is going to be related to Phrolova's entire quest with trying to conquer death. And the reason why we know that the moon is symbolic of these things is because of a specific achievement that you can get when you go into the Lost Beyond. After the story, if you go into Lost Beyond and you go into the kind of well, or like the pool of water, where you first fished out her violin, you basically can see her violin at the bottom of that pool of water, but on the top there is a reflection of the moon. And if you try to scoop up the violin 3 times in a row, you get an achievement called Moon in Water. And what that basically represents is, as I said before, impossibility, or basically kind of like the basically like the complete lack of possibility in her quest, because you can't scoop up a reflection of the moon in the water. It's impossible. If you try scoop it up, it'll just appear again. It just can't be done. And this is something which has been kind of like related as well to Iono's story in the latest patch. So we've kind of like gotten some confirmation of not just the link between these two characters, but also some sort of like cross-reference that, yes, Iono's, not Iono, Phrolova's kind of symbolism with moonlight does essentially kind of like talk about impossibility, right? And when you kind of look at this line, like moonlight stroking your face, you can kind of see that she is very kind of, how do I say, it basically just provides a very sort of like melancholy, sort of like false undertone to the subject of the poem. The person who she's talking to, it's like moonlight is dappling their face as if they were like a false or unobtainable or impossible kind of goal, essentially.
My dear Reverie, come home in here.
So one quick thing to kind of talk about here, my dear Reverie, gonna be something that's repeated quite a lot within the song, as well as also being within the title of the song itself. A reverie, if you didn't know, I did talk about this in my Phrolova video, but if you didn't know, a reverie is essentially a very fleeting daydream or vision. And of course that is symbolic of what Phrolova is trying to restore. She's trying to restore a very fleeting experience and moments, being the existence of her village. When you, for example, talk to her in the theater, if I remember correctly, she talks about how her village and like basically the life that she lived was but a fleeting moment, right? It was a nameless place, in the endless sands of time. And when she kind of like talks about it that way, it kind of makes a lot of sense that essentially what she's trying to restore is a reverie. It's temporary, it's fleeting, and she really just kind of has an obsession with trying to like give this experience or place a sense of permanence. And when, for example, she sings the next line,
Come dance with me in a rosy haze of yesterday.
you can kind of see, like, essentially, like when she says a rosy haze of yesterday, it further reinforces this idea that the reverie is not just temporary and fleeting. It's essentially something which has already gone past, right? It's in the it's not in the present, it's not in the future, it's in the state of yesterday. And when she sings, of course, like the next line,
Reverie, don't drift away, please.
we can kind of see again, like, it just further reinforces the idea, like the reverie is a very fleeting moment, right? And it takes a significant amount of effort to hold on to it because it is so fleeting and temporary. And what she's trying to do with her village, trying to restore it to a state of eternity with Leviathan's gem to make the lost beyond, is essentially trying to make a fleeting daydream an eternal slumber, right? That's basically kind of like what she's trying to do.
Keep me here in your warm embrace.
I think that's kind of like self-explanatory, so yeah.
Trade anything for you for one more day.
And I think that these two lines, so I'll trade anything for you for one more day, it is rather self-explanatory like the line before it, but I think this line's pretty important because it does essentially highlight the level of desperation that Phrolova has to accomplish something which, as we talked about in the previous lyrics, is not just fleeting, is not just temporary and difficult to attain, but is borderline impossible, right? She's willing to do absolutely anything in order to achieve this seemingly unobtainable goal. And that's why she has to go through such terrible and barbaric methods to achieve them, right? As I like to say all the time, you know, like, Phrolova is kind of a bit of a genocide artist, so she's gone kind of like pretty off the deep end, right, when it comes to what she's willing to do in order to make her reverie eternal. And I think that these two lines, that like she'll do anything for just one more day, really just highlights the extent of that desperation. So yeah. Classic instrumental.
I'll perfume your dreams.
Seems like a very unimportant line, but after, like, I've studied a couple of like poems and whatnot, perfume is a strangely symbolic concept when it comes to poetry and a lot of songs. So when you think about, for example, like, I know a lot of you may not have been listening in English class, and that's like completely fine, that's why I'm here. When you think about what can perfume be symbolic of, perfume in itself is a fake scent. It's something you layer on to mask something, right? So when you look at, for example, poems like, you know, T.S. Eliot's poetry, which Phrolova does actually make reference to if you've watched my video, perfume, cologne, like these smells, these fake and false smells, essentially symbolize, like, you know, illusions, like the lack of authenticity, because not only are they fake, they're also unauthentic. They're not the real thing, right? And when you think about, for instance, kind of like how Phrolova in the song talks about perfuming your dreams, we know that these dreams and these illusions are essentially fake, right? They're not real. And she's essentially kind of like layering on this illusion to make something which she herself is very much aware is fake, to kind of like trick herself into believing that it is a real thing, right? And we're gonna go through, for instance, kind of like the next few lines, which really kind of reinforce this idea. So yeah, let's continue.
With scent of flowers and summer breeze. Does it matter if it's true?
And yeah, like, these were basically the lines I'm talking about, right? These two lines, very, very important for understanding a key component of Phrolova's mentality, which is the idea that she has a startling amount of self-awareness, but she wants to kind of trick herself to essentially kind of like cope with the pain, right? And I think that's understandable if we kind of like know what she's been through, but we can kind of see not just through these two song lyrics, but also throughout the story, Phrolova keeps mentioning essentially this idea that she doesn't really care if what she's pursuing is going to be an illusion, right? She doesn't care if, for example, what she's making is basically a fake copy, because all that really matters in the end is that she provides herself and the villagers with a sense of comfort, even if it isn't like completely true or real. Because as we have talked about already, reversing death, of achieving an authentic or real revival, is not just in the past, it's already impossible, right? So when she says, does it matter if it's true, it feels a lot more real, she's kind of basically providing this idea that sometimes a fake can be just as valuable or even better than the real thing. And this kind of reminds me of essentially this really this like scene from Monogatari, if you guys have watched that anime, where I forgot the character's name. I'll post it when I'm editing this video, but it's just the exact same idea. So if you're watching this, you're probably like, I'll probably post the scene. But yeah, anyway.
本物とそれと全く同じ区別もつかんような偽物とどっちの方が価値があると思う？
本物と偽物。
これに対するうちの答えは当然本物の方が価値があるやった。押野くんはどう価値や言うとったかな。けど海輝くんはこない言うとったわ。偽物の方が圧倒的に価値があるってな。そこに本物になろうという意志があるだけ。偽物の方が本物よりも本物だ。
Let's continue the song.
It feels a lot more real when we whistle through the field.
And I think like whistling through the fields, like beside it just being kind of like a nice little line, if you guys have visited the Lost Beyond, it's a very iconic sort of like set of imagery, or kind of like a set of scenery that matches with the poem. And when she says, for example, you know, like when I sing this song for you, I think this is like the strongest like line that you can use to prove that she dedicated this song for Rover. Because if you remember Rover's promise, she promised to kind of like make a better and newer song for Rover, right? So yeah.
When I sing this song for you, my dear Reverie, come hold me near.
And like, yeah, you know, we've already gone through these lines, so let's just enjoy the music.
Come dance with me in a rosy haze of yesterday. Reverie, don't let me go.
Yeah, and like, you know, like Reverie, don't let me go. It is like actually a new line, but it basically reinforces a lot of what we've already talked about when it comes to Reverie being a fleeting daydream that's almost impossible to achieve, and she doesn't want to let go of this reverie, right? She clings onto it as a sort of coping mechanism for her loss, basically. So yeah.
Sanity means I have to hit the road.
So these two lines, actually really powerful in my opinion. It's really kind of like, basically, it's not actually very difficult to understand, but it's really powerful. So when she says, if sanity means I have to hit the road, what she's basically saying is that if sanity means that she has to move on from her loss, then she doesn't want to know where the wind blows. So to hit the road means to basically kind of move on, right? To essentially kind of progress past, for example, a state of being. And in this case, this state of being is essentially dwelling in her loss, moving away from like the loss of her village and whatnot. And knowing where the wind blows is another saying, which basically kind of reinforces this idea that she doesn't want to kind of like follow the road, right? She doesn't want to essentially find out new things or move past her loss and grief. And these two lines together basically just means if being sane or having sanity basically not being crazy, right, means that she, like, logically speaking, she has to move past her loss and grief, then she doesn't want to be sane, right? She doesn't want to essentially know where the wind blows if she has to let go of her village, which is a really fitting line for all of her ambitions, because, of course, now that we know, we've gone through the story, Phrolova does some pretty, like, batshit insane things to fulfill what is, at least relatively speaking, a very small and seemingly insignificant goal. Even, of course, like, you know, it has a lot of personal value to her, of course. But it's a very touching 2 lines. Let's just enjoy the rest of the song.
And I don't wanna know any without
And that is the song. So, if you guys like this format of video, please let me know. I'm more than happy to essentially kind of like do more of these. I did the Phrolova one first because the Cartafia one like lost to Frolova's Crimson Reverie by a small margin, so the next one is going to be Cartafia. But if you enjoy this format of video, make sure to let me know. I'm more than happy to make more of them. But until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.